What is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo sports talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you so much for watching, for listening. However, you are consuming this podcast. I appreciate you guys very much. We have been killing it lately here at Talking Buffalo, and owe it all to you. So if you're not yet subscribed, please go ahead and do that. You know the deal. YouTube, if you're watching the videos, if you like them, just make sure you hit that subscribe button. That's it. If you listen to the show on the audio side, open up Spotify, Apple, wherever you would listen to a podcast, type in Talking Buffalo and hit that follow button. Even if you only listen to shows on the audio side once in a while, it really does help us grow this show. Big shout out to the sponsor of today's show, the law office of William Mattar. Heard in a car, call William Mattar, 444-4444. Call William Mattar today to get the compensation that you deserve. All right, folks, coming up here in just a few minutes, I'm going to play a 20-minute, 24-minute, something like that, a chat that I just wrapped up with Benjamin Allbright, NFL insider based out of Denver, a Broncos radio host and reporter out there, one of the most respected minds in businesses, certainly in the NFL media. I know Ben's doing a tour here of Buffalo spots here in advance of a Bills-Broncos playoff game. So I gobbled him up, hooked up with him, and we had a really good conversation. I'm going to give you guys the lowdown from his perspective on the Broncos this season, their strengths, their warts, and there are warts on that team, what Ben thinks about Denver playing Buffalo, how Broncos fans are feeling about it, how much Denver may have learned from last year's wildcard round beating that they got in Orchard Park against the Bills a year ago. Is that team as good as their record says they are? What's Ben's biggest keys to a Denver win? And what's Ben's biggest concerns from a Denver side about the Buffalo Bills? So plenty more coming up here. Ben Allbright's going to join me in just a couple of minutes. Before we get to that, though, real quick, this is our Thursday podcast. Bills practice report on Wednesday. Everything's kind of moved up a week here because the Bills play on Saturday instead of Sunday. So Wednesday, a fairly significant full practice for the Bills. In terms of did not participate, 3 guys, Max Earson, Jordan Poyer, Ty Johnson. Not surprised at all about Max Earson or Jordan Poyer. I'm at a point right now where I think the only chance that you would see them again, and this is me guessing, I don't know, so let me be careful with my wording here. I would guess the Bills would have to get to the Super Bowl probably to get either of those guys back. In terms of Max Earson, look, exciting rookie, hopefully a big future with this team. But the way Troy White is playing, Max Earson being out, it only matters if one of the 2 starting corners go down. If they got to go to Dane Jackson, it could get ugly. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Jordan Poyer, obviously, a very big deal. We saw what happened at the safety position last week when Poyer went out against Jacksonville. But anyway, did not participate at practice. Hamstring, re-aggravated the injury he had a handful of weeks ago. The one I really hate, and I don't want to say he's not going to play this early in the week. Who knows? Maybe by the time you listen to this on Thursday, Sean McDermott might say he's out. But Ty Johnson, if he can't go, I think it's a big blow to the Bills. I know they got away with it last week in Jacksonville. Ray Davis took a lot of his snaps and didn't have a touch. Frank Gore had 1 catch for 6 yards. Ty Johnson brings a lot to this football team in terms of things they could do with play calls, running the football, especially on the outside and the perimeter. Of course, catching the football. He's a good blocker, and he's a great pass blocker. Not having Ty Johnson, not a star player by any means, but a significant role player on this team. That could be a blow for this team. In terms of the 2 guys coming back from, actually 3 guys from injured reserve, DeMar Hamlin came back, started practicing last week. He was at practice today. Curtis Samuel was a full participant on walkthrough on Tuesday, and Ed Oliver in his blue jersey, if that's worth anything, as opposed to red non-contact. What I will say real quick on them, I don't think I'm, busting out any breaking news here. Curtis Samuel's going to play on Saturday. He's a full participant. He's good to go. He's probably been good to go for a couple weeks. He went on IR in part because of a numbers game and some roster shuffling. But anyway, you will see Curtis Samuel out there Saturday. Damar Hamlin, I'll get to him in a minute. Ed Oliver, of course, is the big one. I don't want to speculate. I mean, just like everyone else, if you on social media, you saw a lot of Bills reporters who were at practice covering during the open media portion of practice. He was out there for warm-ups. We saw that. To me, I don't know, man. I don't know. He's got the leg brace on because he did hurt his knee. That was the setback from his rehab. I think that might be the thing. If he doesn't play, it might be more because of the knee than the pec at this point. I'm going to guess, and this is literally a guess, and I could be wrong in less than 24 hours. I think signs point towards Ed Oliver trying to play in a very specific, targeted amount of snaps. Like, he might be out there. He might be activated. He may dress. Like, Fedarian Mathis played 6 snaps last week for the Bills. I could see Ed Oliver playing 7 to maybe a dozen snaps, maybe in some obvious passing situations. But I guess a little bit of Ed Oliver is better than nothing. But anyway, not really much you could tell from that. Of course, he wants to play, but doesn't make sense. And you got to be careful, too, because if the Bills only dress, roster numbers are roster numbers. And if Ed Oliver plays, first of all, you're going to have to cut somebody. Maybe it's Larry Ogunjobi or Fedarian Mathis. One of those two guys I think would be the prime candidates at this point. If Ed Oliver can only play a small handful of snaps, you're going to be playing the rest of the game with Daquan Jones and Deion Walker and TJ Sanders. So we'll see how that plays out. But it's promising at least that he's at practice. Also saw a video of Terrell Bernard getting loose during warm-ups. Just me speculating right here. It looks still a tiny bit gimpy to me. I don't know that you're going to get anything from Terrell Bernard Saturday or maybe for the rest of the season for that matter. Legs just don't look right to me. I feel like if he can't go in this game, it might be time to put him on IR. Now, with this team, there's a couple questions, of course, like who's going to be the 5th receiver. We know the top 3 are going to be Shakir, Cooks, and Keon. I think the 4th is absolutely going to be Curtis Samuel. So who's going to be the 5th receiver? Is it Mecole Hardman? Is it Christian Wilkerson, who they just brought back to the practice squad this past week? Stephen Gosnell's been on the practice squad all season long. So which one do they bring? If they go with 5, the guess is Hardman, the playoff experience, the ability to return a punt, the speed. I'll tell you what, though, I'm throwing this out there. I don't know what you guys think, but do the Buffalo Bills dare for this game, considering the fact that they know they need to run the football? Do you think and Dalton Kincaid, they don't want to play him too many snaps, right? I wonder if the Bills dare go 4 wide receivers active instead of 5 and 4 tight ends. They play lot 2. So you would have Kincaid, Knox, Hawes, and lot 2 is the 4th tight end. Having that 4th tight end instead of a 5th receiver in Hardman. Just something I'm been thinking about in my own head anyway. So there's that. Like, what roster moves do they make for Samuel and Oliver if they're back, or even Hamlin? Well, Gabe Davis went on IR, so Samuel could just seamlessly take that spot. Like I said, if Oliver plays, maybe Mathis gets cut or Larry Ogunjobi. Damar Hamlin being back could mean Darnell Savage ends up getting cut. Not sure. In terms of elevations, I feel like if Bernard can't go, I think you'll see the same you saw last week. Bernard or Balin Spector would get the nod, and Andre Jones Jr. To be that 4th defensive end, because Javon Sullivan's on the team, but he's not the 4th defensive end. He's pretty much almost exclusively a special teams guy at this point. So, but again, if Bernard don't go and he goes on IR and Spector gets signed to the roster, they have some other options here. To me, the 2 big things, one of them I'll save for the end of the show, and it's the wide receivers. It really sucks. It's awful that 3 guys have gotten injured and are done for the year just in the last 2 games. But I haven't lost I'm not going to go as far to say I'm not worried about it, but I'm not as concerned maybe as some others because that wide receiver room wasn't great when they were healthy. And the guys who make that offense go in the passing game, they're playing. It's Shakir, it's Kincaid, it's Knox. Well, Ty Johnson makes him go in the passing game too, and he's probably not going to play. You get what I'm saying. Now, we'll talk about the wide receivers a little bit at the end of the show. I'm intrigued right now who's going to be the starting safety alongside Cole Bishop. I really don't know. Jordan Hancock came in last week in Jacksonville, and he played bad. I mean, it was rough. Not a good performance from him in a really, really, really hard situation, though, in fairness to him. Now, if they want to go Jordan Hancock, he's been on the roster all year. He's played in dime packages with Jordan Poyer. I would say Hancock having a full week. Well, not even a full week because the Bills don't have a full week. But Hancock all week long knowing that he's going to get the start at safety. Sean McDermott knowing that, working him in, that might really help him out. Or do they go to Cam Lewis? That's a possibility. But we've barely seen Cam Lewis. It makes you wonder if he's more banged up than we think because he hasn't really been on the injury report, not much anyway. So he's the veteran. I don't know who they go with. Hancock absolutely is the better athlete. Cam Lewis, the crafty veteran, a little bit better at tackling, which I think tackling is going to be an important factor in this game. So I don't know. They go with one of those guys, or hell, man, dare say, does DeMar Hamlin actually come back from injured reserve, not having played and only having a handful of practices since early October, and start in an AFC divisional playoff game? Boy, I sure hope not. I sure hope not, but I'll tell you what, I wouldn't rule it out. Anyway, we'll cover a lot more of that stuff on our Bills-Broncos full preview show that'll drop tomorrow. But as for now, let me get to it. I don't want to waste any more time here. My full chat with Benjamin Allbright, NFL insider and Broncos radio host and reporter. All right, I'm joined right now by NFL insider, Broncos reporter, and host at KOA in Denver. Long time, I should say anyway, contributor to Talking Buffalo. I've had him on since this podcast pretty much started in 2018. My man, Benjamin Allbright, what's going on, buddy? How you doing?
Doing pretty well, man. Just enjoying that playoff life, getting to cover a winner for once here in Denver.
It's funny. I go back. I'm not going to play the clip. I've had you on before where we've played this clip, and you've done, we've been doing this for so long, so many shows. I don't even know if you would remember anyway. But back in 2018, I had you on the show, and we were going over the draft and prospects, and you were the one person, and I gave you props then, and for a long time after that, you were the one person that I had talked to that I had saw that got it right with Josh Allen. And not only did you say that the Bills were going to draft Josh Allen in 2018, you said that the Bills were going to move up to get Josh Allen in 2018, which of course, and that was when they were at 12 after they had traded up with Cincinnati. He said they were coming up again to get him. So I've always given you a lot of props for that. You're a Denver guy, an NFL guy, but I feel like you're very highly respected, well-liked here in Buffalo. Maybe that has something to do with the fact that you have picked the Bills to go to the Super Bowl before this year, too, before the season, maybe. So we'll get to that before we get you out of here. But going back real quick, then we'll get into some Broncos stuff. I want to give Bills fans a chance to learn a little bit more about the team you cover from a Denver side of this all. Like I said, the Bills got it right in 2018. John Elway at that time, they got it wrong. Weird year for quarterbacks because, Josh hit early, Lamar hit early, Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold did not hit early. They looked like busts early on. They come around. Josh Rosen, of course, just didn't work out. But what a great draft class. Meanwhile, because, Ben, you said, if you look to cover a winner, the Denver Broncos did not draft Josh Allen. So you've covered quarterbacks over the years since then that featured like Case Keenum and Joe Flacco and Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater, most recently Russ Wilson, now before Bo Nix, obviously promising. Let me ask you this. Throwing the professionalism away the journalistic part, just being a football fan. You kind of wish, would it have been fun for you to be able to cover Josh Allen throughout his entire career, like say if he was in Denver and watching him play and covering him week after week?
Well, yes, I suppose it would, except that if you know anything about Denver and the patience here, I'm not sure Josh Allen would have been Josh Allen if he'd come here to Denver. They had just
Really?
gotten off the Paxton Lynch thing. And so I think they were
Uh,
scared off a little bit by the idea of the big toolsy guy that they needed to develop. And so I think that's part of the reason they shied away from that. One thing I will say is that when I called my shot about Buffalo coming up from 12 that year, they had a deal in place already when I called that shot. At number 4, they were coming up to Denver's spot to get Josh Allen. The only reason that the only impetus behind that trade was if one of 3 players was still available there, and one of those players wound up being available in Bradley Chubb, and so ultimately the Broncos nixed that deal with the Bills, and the Bills then wound up trading up what was it with Tampa, I believe,
yeah.
and in order to secure Josh. But I knew at the time, I had a little background there at the time. You guys actually were going to trade all the way up to 4 to get Josh Allen, and then wound up not having to quite trade that high in the end to make that work. But yeah, it would have been great to cover Josh Allen. But he played, just up the road at Wyoming, and I got to see him a bunch in college. But again, I just don't think he would be the same player today if an organization that did not have the patience to make him what he was. Josh, it took him. He didn't exactly hit right away. It took him a year and a half, almost 2
Yeah.
years to finally kind of get there. And I don't know that Broncos fans would have had the patience at that point in time. Now I think they would, but back then, I don't think they would have.
And he was no sure thing coming out of college. I mean, the he had the athleticism, but the accuracy and some of the other tools were not a given that he would develop into what he has. Anyway, all right. So, what's the pulse right now in Denver with the Denver fans coming into this game? Now, Denver is the number 1 seed. They're rested. They're coming off their bye. They're at home against a battered up 6 seed team right now. Yet nationally, kind of feels like a toss up. I guess depending on where you go, the Bills are actually favored right now by 1.5. It's going to jump around, I'm sure, a little bit. I can tell you from a Buffalo perspective, Ben, there's a severe lack of shit talking right now going on with Bills Mafia for this week, which I think is a blend of being cautiously confident, but straight up respect for the opponent as well. Like, what's the vibe right now, like in Denver playing Buffalo?
Kind of the same. One of those things. I mean, Buffalo. You guys fans, you guys get that reputation for being crazy with jumping through the tables and all that, which is fun. But the fan base has always been respectful. The Buffalo fan base has, at least in my interactions over the last decade or so. And so it's I've always had a mutual respect for the Buffalo fan base because. I mean, even when you're smack talking, it's not that kind of horrible, gross. It's more that friendly ribbing, which is great. As far as the Broncos fan base goes, I think there's optimism, but I think it's cautious. You go back and look at the playoff game last year. I wouldn't say that either team is appreciably different than they were last year. And that was one of those things where Buffalo blew Denver right off the ball. You had the size on the offensive line, and our defense, which is very good, is susceptible to the run game and the tight ends. Well, you look at what Buffalo's going to have to do in this game. You got a perilously thin wide receiver room, probably going to see a lot of 12 personnel. And that's going to be a lot of running the football and a lot of the tight ends, over the middle, and that's where Denver's weak. And so, I think there's a combination of, hey, we're a little more optimistic as Bo has grown another year and everything else, but also, that team matches up pretty well with us. We don't really have a running back, which is where you guys are susceptible. They can take over a game, and so I think there's kind of a we're going to see where this goes on our home turf this year versus what happened last year.
Well, you know what? Jacksonville's a running back Tootin, who's not exactly Jonathan Taylor, and he looked like him when he last week against the Bills. And for whatever reason, Jacksonville just went away from the run. But I want to say this about Denver because, and hear me out, they remind me right now a little bit of the Bills in 2019 to 2020. Like the Bills in 2019, they got to the playoffs. They were a good team. They weren't a 1 seed, but they got to the playoffs and they played Houston and they got out to an early lead. Things kind of fell apart. I think the moment got a little too big for them, and then ended up losing to Houston. I look at Denver last year. The Bills had the famous 17-year drought. Well, Denver had a 9-year drought of their own last year. I'm not saying they were happy to be there, but they did break the drought. They got to the playoffs, And if I remember correct, they scored early in that game. I think Franklin scored on a long pass. Like Denver had success early on, and then Buffalo just clamped down, and it ended up being a very one-sided game. But now I look at Denver as a team that got that experience from making the playoffs. Even if they lost last year, taking that with them this year, and now they've taken their game to another level, and they're the number one seed. And you didn't have to play last week. Kind of remind you, do you see a little bit of parallels in that in terms of they lost last year, they broke a drought, and now they're a more experienced team going into the playoffs this year?
I think there's truth to that. I think the fan base is hoping that carries over in that regard. I think that's where it's at. A lot of I think aside from the hardcore fans that are like, oh, Denver's going to the Super Bowl, they're winning everything, 50 million to nothing, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
I think the realistic fans look at this and they say, okay, we got the number one seed, but we don't really know how good a team we are. We got some lucky breaks. We played teams that had injured quarterbacks. The last two games of the season, we were coasting against, Trey Lance and Chris Olanukin, that kind of stuff. And so I think there is an element. I mean, there's always an element of luck to every season. No matter how good a team is, you still have to have a little bit of luck. But I think the question is like, what is this team? End of the day, the offense has not been particularly effective post J.K. Dobbins injury. The defense started leaking oil a little bit after the bye week. Saw a couple of games there especially after the Commanders game when Cliff Kingsbury, who was very familiar with Vance Joseph because Vance was his DC in Arizona, kind of laid out a little bit of a blueprint on how you kind of handle this defense, and we kind of saw teams do that. So I think there's some trepidation from the fan base, but there's also optimism. I mean, look, they've managed to find ways to win games, even games they shouldn't when they're down huge in the fourth quarter against teams like the Giants for whatever reason, and they find ways to be scrappy and get back into it. And so I think there's a balancing act there between the uncertainty of what we are and the certitude that nothing is too big for this team at this point based on experience this season.
Are the Broncos perceiving themselves a little bit as kind of the underdogs? Is that really a thing? And in your opinion, does it matter? I've seen it in Buffalo from time to time. Last week, the Bills were trying to play, the underdog role against Jacksonville, even though they were actually a very slight favorite. It's going on a little bit here this week as well. I've seen it through the years, where the Bills they feel like they're the underdogs and everyone's counting them out. I don't know if that gives them any momentum or not. You kind of sense that in Denver. I feel like there's no David and Goliath there. That's how I feel anyway. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, you know how it is. Every coach tries to play the underdog card and
Mm.
give whatever motivational edge. I think the most ridiculous example I ever saw was the Patriots a few years ago. Remember when Tom Brady was there? Nobody believes in us. I'm like, you're the New England Patriots. Everybody picked you to be here. Like, how are you trying to play the underdog card? And that said, I mean, the line, you're the number one seed and you wind up being a home underdog. I mean, that's only ever happened one other time, right? That was the Philadelphia Eagles once. Remember when Carson Wentz got hurt, Nick Foles was going to be the starter, and so the divisional round. Yeah, that's the only other time that happened was when they lost their starting quarterback, and so I think there is a little bit of a sort of a disrespect angle there. But at the same time, I mean, Buffalo's a really good football team. I mean, it's probably better than was it a six seed. When all that kind of stuff said and done. And so, I think. I think when you look at that, you try to get any edge you can, and so you kind of play the underdog card up. But at the same time, I think you're right. I don't think there's a David Goliath thing here. Maybe a big brother, little brother because of last year's playoffs.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's any kind of David Goliath thing here. There's
Yeah.
nobody's looking at the number one seed. How are they going to win this?
Yeah, I don't care whatever side of the fence that you're rooting for. There's no David. David's not the number one seed off a bye, and David's also not Josh Allen at quarterback either, who's obviously the best quarterback remaining in the playoffs, if not all of football. Period. A little bit of a redundant question, so I apologize. But for casual Bills fans out there or just trying to get to know a little bit about the Broncos, they don't get in, they just watch the games. What is a difference or two, if there's any like significant difference between the Broncos that we saw last year in the playoffs and the Broncos team that we see right now? Like, what is Denver better at than they were last year, a year ago, and maybe something that they're worse at than they were a year ago, if there is anything?
Um, well, the worst, I mean, running the football, no J.K. Dobbins, you don't have Javante like you had last year. And Sean Payton, continues to be Sean Payton where he forgets the run game exists, for large stretches of time.
Yeah.
I think defensively, I think they're better. You added Hufanga at the safety opposite Brandon Jones. Now Jones is out for the remainder of the year, but Hufanga is a much more aggressive kind of tone setter hitter. Plays that box role a little bit better. They added Dre Greenlaw, who I think is better at covering tight ends. He's much more a coverage backer than Alex Singleton or Justin Sternad, who are more sideline to sideline or shoot the B gap. Linebackers. So they've got that. I think those are the major additions. They added Jahdae Barron in the draft. Barron's not really played a ton of true corner. He's really been more of like the tight end killer, which is going to lead to some interesting coverage stuff. I think on third downs, you're probably going to see Surtain on one of the tight ends and then Barron on the other, and you'll see the corners, outside be Moss and like Abrams Drain with McMillan taking Shakir in the slot. But overall, defensively, I mean, it's more or less the same football team. I think offensively, you got Bo to grow up a year, but I still think a lot of that stuff that he was is kind of the same thing. They added, Evan Engram, which has been a mild contributor. There have been moments, but it's not really been what they thought he was going to be when they got him. Otherwise on the offense are roughly the same. J.K. Dobbins was an absolute animal for the first, whatever it was, 8-9 weeks of the season. But then, once he got hurt, then they haven't been able to run the ball effectively. R.J. Harvey is an excellent pass catcher out of the backfield. Kind of reminds you of Reggie Bush, but he doesn't run the ball very well. He's only been a running back for like 3 or 4 years. Was a quarterback before that, and he just doesn't. He tries to bounce things outside and lacks that instinct for running it. Their best running back right now, honestly, is Jaleel McLaughlin, and they only use him 5-6 times a game. And so it's become a problem, especially down the stretch. And I think fans here are hoping that Jaleel McLaughlin gets a larger role as a running back in this game, toting the ball, because otherwise we might be in for another situation like last year.
Now, I'm sure you and, everyone who covers the Broncos, the fan base, obviously, the team, of course, they're monitoring the health of the Buffalo Bills. This, J.K. Dobbins being out is certainly was a blow for Denver, and you've had a lot of time to kind of adjust to that. The Bills, meanwhile, there's a team that just can't stay healthy, Ben. I'm telling you right now. So, Week 18, they're playing the Jets. They're going to rest most their starters, you know what I mean? So to not risk injury to be healthy going into the playoffs. And they still managed to get Max Harrison hurt in that game. And Ty Johnson, who I'm telling you, he's not a starter, but he is a key player and a great role player in this offense. And Josh Palmer, who now he's on IR and he's done for the year. What a disaster first year signing that's turned out to be. And then they beat Jacksonville last week, but that comes at a price. Tyrell Shavers and Gabe Davis both tore their ACL. So the Bills, like you said, they are really thin at wide receiver. Now, to be fair, they aren't very good at wide receiver when they had a full healthy room anyway, other than Khalil Shakir, which I think kind of goes back to what you were talking about. And I agree with you fully. You're going to see a lot of 12 personnel. I think a lot of 2, even 3 tight end sets with them. But the health of the Bills has just been unbelievable. Before we get out of here, too, I want to, from a Bills perspective, like quickly, the keys that I think are going to give the Bills the best chance to win the game and how Denver would combat that. Number one, the Bills got to have some success on first down, whether it's running the ball, play action, whatever. I feel like you can run on Denver. I mean, the metrics look great. Like if you only look at the stats for the whole season and you go and look at Denver's defense, I'm like, holy shit, dude. They're second here, third here. They're like top 5 in everything. But it's been leaky. They've been leaking oil, like you said, on defense. You got to have success on first down because if you get behind the sticks against Denver and that pass rush leads the NFL in sacks, they'll eat you up. They will eat you up if you let them pin their ears back. So you got to run the ball or just move the ball effectively on first down. You got to stay out of those second and third and longs. And then the other thing, I know it's rudimentary, the turnovers. The Buffalo Bills this year are literally undefeated. They're 12-0 when they don't lose a turnover battle. So if you don't lose a turnover battle with the Bills, they're in good shape. From a Denver perspective, what do you think? The keys to stopping that, obviously, but what would you consider 1 or 2 keys to Denver walking off with the victory themselves?
Well, I would say you hit the nail on the head on both those things. They are susceptible to the run, and you got to stay ahead of the sticks, or they will tee off on you. And I think those are correct. I think from the flip side of that, if you're Denver, I think you've got to find a way to run the football. You've got to have sustained drives. You've got to keep that defense on the field so you can gas them in the fourth quarter, and you've got to take your shots judiciously in the pass game. As much as the Buffalo 28th against the run, they're number 1 against the pass, and so I think that's if you're Bo Nix, you've got to be judicious when you're doing stuff like that. Don't try to squeeze something something and don't try to play hero ball, which he will do occasionally. Just take off with your legs and get what you can and keep the thing rolling. They've had against these backups the last couple of weeks. They've had a number of sustained 14 play type drives, atypical of what Sean Payton has done most of the rest of the year. And I think that that's the kind of stuff they'll need to continue to be able to do. If you can have those long sustained drives and take advantage of fourth quarter altitude, that's your real shot at winning.
Is Denver good? I haven't watched enough Broncos football to know this, which is why I'm asking you. Getting the ball out on the perimeter, short passes, running outside, because I could tell you, watching the Bills every game this year, first of all, we all know they're lousy at stopping the run. And something that's probably bewildered me all season long is there's so many teams the Bills have played that aren't notoriously good at running the football, but they have success, and for whatever reason, they get away from it. Again, going back to last week, they put way too much on Trevor Lawrence when they could have just kept running the football. The Bills struggle against that, and the other thing the Bills have struggled against a lot is tackling. Like, this is not, at times at least anyway, this is not a very good tackling team. From a Buffalo perspective, something that worries me and a lot of Bills people is Denver getting the ball on screens in the flat, open in space, and just making people miss once they have the football.
Well, that's what they try to do. They try to get it in the open field and hope that you can't. They got, you've got a fast guy like Marvin Mims, although he gets ignored a lot. You'll have Troy Franklin. He has some drops issues. Lil Jordan Humphrey is the bigger guy out there on the perimeter. They try to get the ball to and see if he can't break a few tackles, which he can be good for every once in a while. But that's what they do. It is a ton of screens out there to the wide receivers. You're going to see a ton of stuff, down the sidelines, outside. Not as much between the hashes as you would normally think. You'll see some square ends and stuff like that on third down, but most of what they do is out there on the perimeter with that screen game, trying to bait you into coming in, and then once you drop the safety down in that box, then they're going to try to hit you over the top, in those kind of situations. So that's the crux of this offense. It's quick hitters, get it out quick, a lot of screens, things like that. The run game again, it just struggled without J.K. Dobbins in there, and so that's the thing. If you can shut down Harvey early, he'll go for 10 or 12 plays that are -1, stuff like that, and then pop one, eventually. But it's frustrating as this is a very schedule based offense, and the run game is not conducive to that.
As we wind down here, give me an X factor or two, maybe one on each side of the football for Denver that I'm not saying they're no names, they're just people that maybe we're not talking about enough that could end up having a big influence on this game for Denver.
Well, on the defensive side, Jaquan McMillan. He's the slot corner. He was the guy who's going to be lined up on Shakir, and so that's the one you need to keep an eye on. It doesn't get talked about as much between Pat Surtain and of course Riley Moss over there, but he's been pretty good. And he's known to he'll get a turnover or two here that you got to be real careful. He's good, more than you think he is. On the offensive side, man, it's going to be interesting because I don't know. Jaleel McLaughlin, I think, would be the name you would keep your eye on simply because he's the better runner. But Sean Payton has his guys, and he just has his guys, and he'll ignore better players for his guys. So guys like Marvin Mims and Jaleel McLaughlin, who should be out there more, wind up not getting quite the run that they could. Evan Engram, I think, could be the X factor here at the tight end position. Games he gets going, they tend to be pretty good in. Games that he doesn't, they tend not to. And so we'll kind of see how that goes early on.
One last thing, too. A redemption guy, and I'll give you a quick one for Buffalo. Keon Coleman, because of these injuries, is going to get at least an opportunity to have a redemption. There's a lot of people in Buffalo saying, well, this could be, the whole season, toss it in the garbage. It doesn't matter. One good week, the Bills are an AFC championship. He can make up for a lot of things by making a few plays. Is this going to be the guy who has the big redemption story, the guy who looked like in week 1 against Baltimore, 8 catches for $114 and a touchdown? Or is he going to be out there for 75% of the snaps and be the guy who's averaged about 2 catches for 23 yards a game through the rest of the season? Like, he's got that redemption opportunity. Is there anybody in Denver that's kind of not played up to expectations, but just one good afternoon and it can wipe away a lot of negativity things that they did for the season?
Guy I just mentioned, Evan Engram. You
Yeah.
pay big money to bring him in. I don't think he's had a game over 40 yards, maybe one game over 40 yards all season. And he's just not been what they had envisioned when they brought him in. So if he can be a viable pass catcher and he gets some clutch plays there, I think that would be the redemption.
All right, last question for you, and I'm going to phrase this the right way so you're not actually technically making a prediction here on the show. I'll say this. You picked the Buffalo Bills and the Green Bay Packers to go to the Super Bowl before the season started. Obviously, Green Bay's out, Buffalo's still in. Are you going to stick with the AFC pick to go to the Super Bowl? That's the best way I can ask you without no score. All right, screw it. Are the Buffalo Bills going to win this game? Who do you have in this game? All right. And if you don't want to answer because it's a little too early in the week and, you're done your own, I would understand. But you had Bills, Packers, Super Bowl. You're sticking to your guns with the AFC.
I think so. I'm hedge a little bit here and say I'm leaning that way,
Sure.
as it sits at this point when we're discussing this. But yeah, I'm kind of leaning that way. I have no faith that the Broncos are going to be able to run the football effectively and stay in the game plan that they wanted. I mean, we saw it last year. The altercation with Sean Payton and Vance Joseph on the sideline in that game was Vance Joseph saying, "Hey, man, relax. Let's get back to the game plan. Run the ball, keep it close, have a chance at the end." And Sean Payton melting down and spiraling, and then deciding to throw the ball over the yard, and we wind up, getting our ass whooped. So, I don't have faith that Sean Payton can be patient enough with the run game that, frankly, has not shown anything to be patient in. And so ultimately, I would lean Buffalo in this.
All right. Perfect. I want to thank you for your time, everybody. If you're not already doing so already, make sure you follow Benjamin on Twitter X at Allbright NFL. Absolutely. Not just one of the best insiders and sources of information, but one of the best follows on Twitter as well. Really appreciate your time, buddy.
Yeah, anytime, man.
All right. All right. Thank you again, Benjamin Allbright, one of the best NFL insider, Denver sports host and reporter. Been having him on the show for a long time now. One of the more respected voices in the NFL media business. Really, really good stuff. So thank you again, Ben. And I'll tell you what, I get a sense after just talking to him now that it's just like in Buffalo. I think Denver is optimistic, cautiously maybe optimistic, confident, but quietly confident, but certainly not overconfident, which I feel that is the exact same thing here in Buffalo. Buffalo fans, and rightfully so, feel like the Bills can absolutely win this game. But there's a lot of scenarios and a lot of ways where they don't. And as Ben pointed out, there's certainly matchups and players with Denver, especially on the defensive side of the ball. If the Bills cannot run it effectively, that will absolutely favor the Denver Broncos. Ben pointed out some of them perfectly. You got that factor. They're at home. Perhaps they've learned from last year's lopsided defeat. The Bills are a battered team right now, physically. They really are. There's lots of reasons to think Denver can win this game. And then you go to the other side of the football as well. The Buffalo Bills are very battle-tested. They really are. It's a battle-tested football team right now. Sean McDermott is exceptionally good at confusing quarterbacks, getting them to make mistakes, mixing up coverages, and just finding a way to make quarterbacks who aren't elite make those big mistakes. Like quarterbacks who are good, like Trevor Lawrence, to less than good. I look at Bo Nix, and this isn't to say that Bo Nix is not capable of going out and having a very, very good football game. He's certainly capable of that. But right now, I look at Bo Nix, and I just think he's good. I don't think he's bad. I don't think he's average. But I also don't think he's great or elite by any means. So you have a lot of confidence that Sean McDermott will find ways to make Bo Nix make mistakes. And by the way, Denver's prone to mistakes. I mean, this is a great football team. They're the number one seed. But when you peel off the layers a little bit, there's warts on that team. And one of them is being prone to turn the ball over. They've turned the ball over tied for fifth the most amount of times in the league. And the Bills are quite literally undefeated when they don't lose the turnover battle. So there's reasons to think that the Bills can win this game, and not even being a homer, just absolutely realistic reasons. You could tell by that conversation, Ben thinks that Denver's big concerns are going to be stopping the Bills' running game. And you also got to think, after the Bills, even though they got away with a win, and that's all that matters, you advance. You survive and advance in the playoffs. But you could bet your ass that James Cook and that offensive line are not happy about the production they had last week. And they're probably foaming at the mouth to go against an undersized Denver front seven and try to push those guys around and run the football. You could tell, as Ben pointed out, that's a concern with Denver. And then also being able to run the football themselves. There's no difficult blueprint to having a lot of success against the Bills defense. It's nothing elaborate and it's nothing fancy. Run the football. The Bills stink, at least they have for the most part this season, at stopping the run. They excel in pass defense. So to beat the Bills, quite simple, run the ball effectively. So stopping the run and running the ball, you can tell Ben considers that the big concerns for Denver. I'll also say, I know the wide receiver issue nationally, especially and locally, but especially nationally, is a big deal with the Bills. And it sucks. It sucks to lose Gabe Davis, and it exceptionally sucks to lose Tyrell Shavers. It sucks to lose Josh Palmer in the season finale. 3 guys gone for the year. I get it. That said, and I'm not blowing it off at all, but I think it's at least a little bit slightly overblown. Like, in all due respect to Gabe Davis and the Josh Palmer and the Tyrell Shavers, they're not winning the game. They're not going out there and making the big plays that are going to win or lose the football game on the offense. They're contributors. Shavers is a great blocker, a great special teams guy, contributes a little bit in the passing game. Gabe Davis has his moments. Josh Palmer has largely underachieved this year, and he's not stayed healthy. Those guys aren't going to win you the game. The guys that are going to win you the game offensively, besides Josh Allen, of course, it's James Cook, it's Dalton Kincaid, maybe Dawson Knox a little bit, and Khalil Shakir. That's just what it is. And then the Bills have Josh Allen too. So again, they feel good about their chances, as they should, just like Denver does, as they should. Look, it's going to be a fascinating matchup, I believe, on Saturday. And again, awesome stuff from Ben Allbright there. So thank him very much. Thank all of you for watching and for listening to today's show. Definitely going to have a full Bills Broncos preview on the show tomorrow. 3 keys to a Bills victory, like we always do. 5 bold predictions for the game. Ultimately, I'll let you know what I think is going to be the final score of the game. Might or might not, I don't know yet. I'm working on a few things. Have a guest with me for the show tomorrow. But regardless, there will be a show tomorrow. So thank you very much, and we'll be back. It's getting close, folks. Brand new show coming up tomorrow.